If you have ever wondered why the mightiest empires in history suddenly crumble despite their vast armies and overflowing treasuries, stay with me and subscribe, because the same financial patterns repeat across centuries. And once you understand them, global power starts to look less mysterious and far more predictable. Empires rarely collapse in a single dramatic moment. Instead, they weaken financially long before the political structure visibly cracks. As rising military expenses, administrative burdens, and social obligations quietly outgrow the economic engine that once fueled expansion and guaranteed stability. At the heart of every empire lies a simple equation: revenue must consistently exceed obligations. And when expansion slows or stops, rulers are forced to squeeze more from existing taxpayers, borrow aggressively, or manipulate the currency, each option carrying dangerous long-term consequences. The Roman Empire offers one of the clearest financial lessons. As its growing military payroll, vast border defenses, and urban welfare programs required steady silver flows that eventually became insufficient, tempting emperors to debase coinage rather than reform spending. When silver content in Roman coins steadily declined during the 3rd century, citizens experienced inflation that eroded savings, disrupted trade, and undermined trust in money itself, proving that currency manipulation may delay fiscal reckoning but ultimately weakens the foundations of economic confidence. Inflation functions as a hidden tax, redistributing wealth from ordinary savers to those closest to political power. And while it can temporarily fund state obligations, it distorts prices, discourages investment, and encourages barter or foreign currency reliance when trust collapses. Another recurring secret behind imperial decline is mistaking temporary windfalls for permanent prosperity. A trap visible in 16th century Spain, where immense flows of American silver created an illusion of endless wealth that masked structural weaknesses at home. Instead of channeling bullion into diversified industries and productive capacity, Spain relied heavily on imported goods and foreign manufacturing, causing precious metals to leak abroad while domestic competitiveness stagnated, leaving the empire financially impressive, yet economically fragile, as military campaigns across Europe demanded ever larger sums. The Spanish crown borrowed extensively from bankers, repeatedly suspending debt payments when obligations became unmanageable, damaging credibility and increasing borrowing costs in a vicious fiscal cycle. Debt itself is not inherently destructive, because when used responsibly, it allows states to smooth expenses and invest in growth. But when political leaders treat borrowing as limitless and reform as optional, confidence evaporates and refinancing becomes increasingly expensive. The Ottoman Empire reveals another dimension of fiscal vulnerability, as mounting military pressures and administrative inefficiencies led to repeated debasements and heavier taxation, gradually undermining monetary stability and provoking unrest among merchants and provincial elites. When tax collection systems become privatized through intermediaries who prioritize extraction over development, the state may receive short-term revenue boosts. Yet long-term productivity declines because incentives favor squeezing existing wealth rather than creating new wealth. Late Ming China demonstrates how dependence on a single monetary resource can destabilize an entire system, as heavy reliance on silver inflows meant that disruptions in global trade tightened liquidity, increased tax burdens, and intensified social unrest. When peasants cannot obtain sufficient currency to pay taxes, even loyal populations may rebel, showing that monetary shortages can transform economic distress into political revolution when governments lack flexibility or empathy in their fiscal responses. Climate shocks and poor harvests amplify fiscal crises because declining agricultural output reduces tax receipts while increasing relief obligations, placing simultaneous pressure on revenues and expenditures that few empires manage efficiently. The Dutch Republic offers a contrasting lesson, illustrating how credible institutions and disciplined public finance can sustain large debts at relatively low interest rates, enabling a small nation to punch above its weight in global trade and warfare. Yet even sophisticated financial systems create new vulnerabilities. As powerful creditor classes may resist reforms that threaten bond values, trapping governments between growth-oriented policies and obligations to investors seeking guaranteed returns. The British Empire's gradual financial transformation after the Second World War shows how reserve currency status can erode over decades, especially when economic fundamentals shift and defending exchange rates demands painful domestic sacrifices. Maintaining a dominant global currency requires productivity, fiscal discipline, and stable inflation, because once foreign holders doubt long-term value, they demand adjustments that constrain domestic economies and expose structural weaknesses. The collapse of the Bretton Woods gold convertibility system in mid-1971 revealed how even the world's largest economy may abandon previous commitments when external obligations become incompatible with internal priorities and fiscal realities. Commodity dependence represents another common imperial hazard. As reliance on oil, gold, or other exports creates volatile revenue streams that fluctuate with global prices beyond the control of domestic policymakers. The late Soviet Union exemplified this vulnerability. As declining oil prices in the 1980s sharply reduced export earnings while military spending and consumer subsidies remained high, intensifying fiscal strain during a period of political uncertainty. When export revenues fall abruptly, governments face difficult trade-offs between austerity, borrowing, and currency adjustment, each option carrying political costs that can accelerate institutional breakdown if public trust is already fragile. Inequality compounds fiscal stress because narrow tax bases force states to extract heavily from limited segments of society, generating resentment and reducing voluntary compliance, which is always cheaper and more sustainable than coercion. When elites secure exemptions or shield wealth abroad, the fiscal burden shifts downward, increasing social tensions and weakening the legitimacy of central authority, particularly during economic downturns. Overextension is another financial constant in imperial decline. As newly conquered territories demand defense, infrastructure, and administration that often exceed the immediate economic benefits of expansion, military innovation raises the cost of staying dominant, since maintaining cutting-edge fleets, fortifications, or modern weapon systems requires continuous investment that rivals can sometimes replicate more cheaply. As competition intensifies, empires may respond by increasing taxes or borrowing to fund deterrence. Yet such measures only succeed if economic growth keeps pace with security expenditures. When growth slows while obligations rise, deficits widen, and leaders frequently choose politically convenient solutions, like currency manipulation or short-term borrowing instead of structural reform. Administrative corruption accelerates decline by diverting public funds into private hands, reducing effective investment in infrastructure, education, and productive sectors that sustain long-term prosperity. Human capital flight also undermines imperial resilience, because skilled merchants, artisans, and professionals often migrate toward more stable environments when instability or heavy taxation threatens their livelihoods. As talent leaves, innovation declines, and the tax base shrinks, creating a feedback loop in which declining revenues reduce the state's ability to restore stability, prompting further emigration. Transaction costs rise in declining empires, as bribes, protection payments, and bureaucratic hurdles become embedded in daily commerce, effectively acting as hidden taxes that discourage entrepreneurship. When businesses spend more on navigating uncertainty than on productive investment, economic dynamism fades, and state revenues weaken further, compounding fiscal distress. Financial repression sometimes emerges as a desperate measure, forcing citizens to accept unfavorable currency terms or compulsory loans. But such policies often drive capital underground rather than restoring trust. Confidence is the invisible pillar of empire, and once investors, merchants, and citizens doubt the stability of money or governance, economic contraction can unfold rapidly despite outward displays of military strength. History repeatedly shows that collapse often appears sudden, only because financial erosion was gradual and largely ignored until a triggering shock exposed accumulated weaknesses. Those shocks may include wars, commodity crashes, pandemics, or banking crises. Yet they prove catastrophic primarily when pre-existing fiscal fragility limits a government's capacity to respond effectively. Reform is frequently possible in declining empires, but entrenched interests benefiting from the old system resist changes that threaten their privileges, delaying adaptation until options narrow. Sustainable power requires diversified economies, transparent fiscal systems, credible institutions, and investments in productivity rather than prestige, because these elements generate resilient revenue streams. Empires that reform early can transform expansive dominance into stable prosperity, while those clinging to illusionary wealth or excessive leverage often face abrupt reckonings. Viewed through a financial lens, imperial history resembles a series of balance sheets in which assets, liabilities, and credibility determine survival more reliably than battlefield victories alone. When liabilities consistently outpace assets and confidence deteriorates, decline becomes mathematically inevitable unless decisive corrective measures are implemented in time. The lesson across Rome, Spain, the Ottomans, Ming, China, Britain, and the Soviet Union is clear. Economic discipline and institutional adaptability matter, more than sheer size or military prestige. Now, I would love to hear your perspective on which financial factor you believe most decisively breaks great powers. And if you found this deep dive valuable, please subscribe so we can continue exploring history's economic secrets together.